All right. Well, it is actually quite a beautiful day out. It's uh, it's crazy. It's like, and this little cloud is producing hail, and this cloud is getting out of the way for the sun, and this cloud looks like it's going to Kansas to be involved in refilming of Wizard of Oz. Okay. Luckily, we have clothing. Let's let's hear it for clothing. All right. Yesterday, I got blabbing. Sorry about that. Um, about Dune, and of course, that also occurred to me. This is the kind of thing that occurs to you after. Is that the clothing which is keeping them cool would have been wool, probably goat wool is my guess, or the fleece that comes off goats. But natural fibers is the point, but not cotton because they wouldn't have grown it. I wouldn't imagine. I don't know. Somebody could tell me about that. But since they were nomads and I think they often had herds of goats or sort of these tough animals that could withstand the desert. I think they would have been collecting. I know that, wool does have some astonishing properties in terms of maintaining homeostasis, I guess is the best way to put it. Anyway, okay, fine. So today I'm going to talk about this documentary, Jodorowsky's Dune. Jodorowsky is a crazy Spanish guy. Well, he's not Spanish, really. He's landed up in Spain, is my memory of it. And he worked with Moebius a great deal. This is a documentary about the film that never was, basically. So the first filming of Dune was the David Lynch, which I complained about at some length yesterday. And he got Orson Welles to join the project, and Mick Jagger, Salvador Dali. The music was going to be by Pink Floyd, and so on. And he also brought in people like Giger, who was the Swiss surrealist who designed the Alien. He's famous for designing the Alien, and Moebius, Jean Giraud, who I've talked about many moons ago now. So this is a great documentary. It's basically about it's got a lot of footage of Jodorowsky, Hodo as they call him, and his designs basically. And there is a book of Dune. It's this massive thing. It's his Bible, and it's basically the shooting script effectively, with the designs in it. Now, if you Google this thing, you should be able to find a PDF of it and actually look through it. There are, I think, 5 copies out there in the world, all owned by people attached to the original production, I suspect, or people who have probably bought the books. They're pretty much priceless in the sense that they can't be duplicated. They can be. The book could be produced, and I'm surprised, really, that somebody hasn't secured the rights to go and produce something like that. But partly because so much design goes into a film. And so today I thought I would talk about that a little bit. Because this documentary is basically about, well, if you're going to design Dune, what would it look like? Because you can't just, you could just say, well, it's going to look like. And actually, the drawing I'm thinking of that's very striking from the images of Dune is one of the Giger drawings. This is Hans Rudi Giger, who was, as I say, the Swiss surrealist. And, he had a pretty grotesque vision of the world. So he designs the Baron, and he designs these navigators. And there's a lot of the things about the first film about the David Lynch film, which are the design is like, yeah, that looks right. Like the navigators sort of look like these Baroque sort of. They look like steampunk, basically. So, it's there's lots of design in the first Dune film that you look at and you think, yeah, they got that right, and they poured money on it, and it was a disaster because they didn't have a script, basically. And I don't think Lynch was interested in making a narrative, and you have to tell the narrative. This is a story. You've got to tell the story of Paul Atreides in the way that Paul, who has visions of the future, basically, and whose children even more. Got to get some hot fluids in here. It's just out there getting chilblains. Well, actually, you don't get chilblains until you come in and expose your very cold, whatever it is, extremities or something, to a very hot surface. As they used to, the children would come running in from playing in the snow, and then stand in front of the fire. And I gather that's what causes the chilblains, which are sort of. Anyway, I don't want to talk about that. Okay, so I thought that what I would do is, one of the things that happens when you go into a film which is going to be heavily image driven. So Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones or Blade Runner. Blade Runner is one of the best examples I'm going to use today. The Star Wars movies. So these movies, not Game of Thrones, not Lord of the Rings, but the other movies were made on the cusp of digital special effects, but digital special effects really were not there yet. The only film at that point which had any digital special effects was really Tron. And Tron was designed by this guy, Sid Mead, who just died, and was the guy for smart film design for, I don't know, probably, I think the Sid Mead sort of ideas of film design dominated, well, that's a good question. Like, how long did they dominate? They dominated certainly the early 80s. But then, it's like, then what? Then how much... then, the Star Wars movies began to win. And, yeah. So now I'm wondering whether or not they've forbidden in this... No, here's the Tron stuff. So, oh no, it's not. What's going on here? Strange Days. Oh, here's Tron. Okay. And oh, that's Star Trek. What the dickens is going on here? So Mead was Tron 208. Okay, so these are not in chronological order. Somebody decided to put them in. Yeah, I remember this book. It's got beautiful art in it, but it was designed by an idiot. Ironically, how ironic is that? Okay, here's Tron. So one of the first films we saw that had significant Sid Mead input was Tron. Okay, and so he did things like he really designed an industrial designer. The designers who usually take over a film for a long time were industrial designers. And industrial designers are, I've talked about these folks before. These are people who make things like, they design kitchenware and they design things we use in the house, like vacuum cleaners and small appliances like Dyson, the Dyson appliances, so fans and things like that. But they also design things like lamps and beds and all the furniture we use. And so that's all industrial design. So here, in this case, he also designed the font that they use in Tron. And that was something which was, he says, idea for graphical numeric progression. And each of them is based in a square. Okay, so, and then I'm looking for his drawings of, so here are his drawings of the search for appropriate imagery for Tron found Mead stretching his vision to include solid-state devices. So he begins to design. You can see interiors here that they're supposed to look digital. Now you have to remember that in 1980, nobody knew squat about what digital meant. Like here, for instance, is his image of the master control program, which is ultimately taken over. Well, that uses Sark, David Warner again, playing a villain, and is ultimately taken over by David Warner. Well, that's it. Oh my goodness. Okay, so no light cycles. Wow, I'm shocked. Okay. Yeah, there's one light cycle there. Jeez. It's just from the front. He designed a tank. I'm surprised. Some of the things on the back. I specifically pulled this one because it's the movie art. So this is number 5 from Short Circuit, which he designed. And you have to have an industrial designer design this stuff because it has to actually work, right? It can't fall apart on the actors while they're on the stage. And it's probably a prop that has to be picked up and used, right? So there's a picture in... Okay, so he also designed 2010, and this is a little crappy. At the time, you sort of... Yeah, Wallaby. I have no idea. These people are probably, no longer on the face of the planet. But there is a picture of Mead holding one of his rocket units. Okay, it's not in this book. What you're seeing here, what you would see here, if I would show them to you, here I'll show you some pictures. What you're looking at here are typical industrial design marker renderings, which are done with typically very. So this is, for instance, the workspace for these are 2 grippers that run a robot probe, and then here are the actors. Actually, so here's Roy Scheider and some unknown Russian guy. And here's the actual workspace. So they started out with this, and they made that. Of course, it's in black and white, so it looks like crap. So, for instance, here's the bridge of the Leonov, right? And I know it's full of incredible stuff, and it looks like you're like, oh my God, it's so busy. And it is busy. But the drawing itself is only one point perspective, right? The perspective, the vanishing point is in there, so every line points to it. Right? So it's a relatively simple way to get the idea out, and then they built it, and it looks like this, right? So then because then it has to be lit, and one of the things about this kind of design is that you can assume that most of the design is going to be invisible because you're not there to make it. The point of the film is not to say, hey, cool, look at this design we paid millions and millions of dollars for. The idea is to have a story, right? Although I have to say this film focused more on beauty, partly because it was written by Arthur C. Clarke. And Clarke is not a fantastic storyteller. So what you're looking at when you look at here is a marker rendering. Because at the time, the fastest, easiest way to render something was to get a bunch of gray markers, which had big, wide, and you render carefully and deliberately so that you get patterns like this. So you have to fill in a space. You don't just scribble it. People were trained very specifically how to do this kind of rendering. Like there were just rendering courses. If you were going through an art center, like this is the pod, the evacuation or the extravehicular activity, the EVA pod, extravehicular activity pod. So, there's a real these are drawings that they're called isometric drawings, and they should give you the scale. You should be able to take something and then scale it up. And in fact, they because they have to build them, right? So you make a drawing like that, and then an architect or an architectural draftsman takes the images that you've done and says, okay, how big is this thing actually going to be? We have to build it so that it won't, as I say, it won't collapse on people. So Mead also did a huge number of designs for Blade Runner. So this is Blade Runner. Oh, hold on a second. Whoa. You're moving too fast, son. You're moving. Ball. That's a joke, son. Okay. So, for instance, okay, so this guy is Ron Cobb. And Cobb is an American, went to Vietnam, came back, and I think he was always kind of a hippie anyway. Many people became hippies because of Vietnam, and that is, going to Vietnam, that was it. And as far as I know, he was not combat. He was not in combat, but he won't talk about it. So he did designs, for instance, for the Cantina sequence in Star Wars. And you'll see the same kinds of rendering here, although Cobb is a lot more delicate than Sid Mead. So here's one of the, this is one of the vegetarian aquatic air breather, feeds by passing plankton, bearing water through mouth slits, and at the neck openings. Okay, I thought he was a vegetarian. This guy's a herbivore, yeah, okay. And Cobb has this very particular way of rendering. So these are also industrial design drawings, but they're done in his own particular way. So then Cobb gets pulled in. All these guys sort of come to work at the center of the movie industry in the late 70s and the early 80s. And they really have a huge impact on the way film is going to look at the end of the 70s. So why Alien is going to look the way it does, why Blade Runner is going to look the way it does, Tron is because of Sid Mead pretty much, why the Conan movies are going to look the way they do, that's Cobb's design. And the Star Wars movies are going to get a good deal of that design influence, and Joe Johnston is going to be the sort of main guy, and Ralph McQuarrie, of course, who is going to be the lead. So Sid Mead was, one of the guys, and Ralph McQuarrie was the other guy, and he's the guy who did the paintings of, Bespin with the Cloud City and all that stuff. And I sort of figured you're kind of Star Wars out, so I didn't bring any of those. But the people who brought these people all together, the person who brought all these people together was Dan O'Bannon. And Dan O'Bannon did work on Dune, and he made contact with, he knew, because he was in LA, and he was interested in this stuff, he made contact with Ron Cobb, and he knew about Giger, and basically he knew about people who were up-and-coming artists, and he said, he said to Jodorowsky, you've got to see Giger's work, and Jodorowsky's like, Giger, who's that? So they brought him in. So he's the guy who brought in all these amazing people. So, for instance, this is the painting that Cobb did for the original, what the planet would look like with the alien. Well, not the alien planet, because it's not really an alien planet. The aliens are on the planet. And so here we see the inside, for instance, of the Nostromo. And you can see the lifeboat bay. And here's Ash's little pod. I love this particular sequence here. You can see lifeboat bay. So the top drawing is the lifeboat. Then the explosive bolts blow off the hatch. Then there's this rail which turns and becomes a launching pad. Then the boat takes off, and then there it goes and jettisons the last piece of it. It's just a beautiful sequence, and it's beautifully rendered. And you can see that mostly there's no color because it's in space, right? So you got very, very bright sunlight. So everything basically to indicate that it's bright sunlight is white. And then you see the shadows. So the shadows would have been done in a warm warm grays. Otherwise, the only color on it is basically red, black, and white. Red, black, and yellow. And so then, so this is Cobb's painting of the operations deck in Nostromo. Now, once Ridley Scott got a hold of it, it's like, oh yeah, we're not doing that. So Ridley Scott was like, okay, do a version which looks more like a World War II bomber. So what the heck? Jeez. So Cobb did this version. So it still looks like a flight deck. In other words, it's still, the thing is that these guys are doing things which are operational. It's like, no, it's going to look like it should work. Well, that's not how Ridley Scott sees things, right? So, what am I looking for here? It must be in my one of the other books. Here we go. No. Yep. Oh, yep. Jeez. Yeah. Okay. So here, so you see the progress of the idea. So here is the Ridley Scott. So Ridley Scott, the director, looks at this and says, "No, look. I want this to be claustrophobic. Like this is all open. It's no, it's not frightening enough. Drop the ceiling. Make this thing claustrophobic. Make it super jammed up. They're jammed for space. Okay. So then you get this kind of thing. So remember, here's the original painting, and then Ridley Scott's like, no. So you drop it right down, and then this is what it actually looked like. So it's completely suffocating, and that's the point. Is that the design has to bring about an emotional response, to quote Blade Runner. Are these made to evoke an emotional response? They sure are. So if you get so to go back to Cobb here, if you get there are some very evocative paintings, for instance, on this side of the hallway, like this is the air shafts, and you'll recognize that. It's like, yeah, that's pretty much what the air shafts look like. And there are some of the most, yeah, oh boy, there's good stuff here. Yeah, okay, here's the bridge. Here's the bridge design in a larger version. It's been reversed there. And then he did things like the airlock, like that has to be designed too. So there's going to be a scene in this, right? So at the center of the airlock, you'll see a red square with the black and white half and half inside it, which indicates on the other side there's no atmosphere, right? Vacuum. So this is something which Cobb worked on and developed this sign system, which he calls semiotic standard, which really just means sign system standard. And they're very good. I mean, that's really thoughtful. So it's like, what is this? No, I think that's pressurized. Yeah. Okay. So anything that has a red square around it will be pressurized. Pressurized gravity. Pressurized no gravity. Biocontainment. Vacuum air. Door lock. Airlock. So they're really smart, and electricity, medical, power, reactor core, or hazmat, so it's even more dangerous. So really, really clever stuff. And what they're doing is figuring out how would a world like this work. And he's showing, and you have to show this how to render it. So he says, this is. You can render these this way, but if you're going to render it on a white ground, you have to put yellow behind it because you have to show the edges of the box, basically. So it's really smart stuff. It's like, this is, how would this actually work? And so here are some designs for the Nostromo. And he's going to give you a scale by, like, this is Ash's blister. There's Ash there. So you can get a sense of, how big this thing is, even though it's attached to a, okay. And then it's a bunch of alien stuff. And then Sid Mead was brought on to do Blade Runner. And so what happened was these guys had been working on Dune in the mid-70s. And a lot of the designs, and they would have been paid a pittance, and a lot of the designs basically sort of floated around. And so when they began to get ready to do Alien, Dan O'Bannon was championing the project, and they brought Ridley Scott on to direct it. And O'Bannon and Ron Shusett wrote it. And O'Bannon said, "Well, you know, we've already got all these guys doing this great work." So he brought in all the same people, and so Dune, effectively, the design for Dune was kind of repeated. Now, the one guy who didn't join the Alien team was Carlo Rambaldi. And Rambaldi went on to design E.T., which I never particularly liked, but I'm not a Spielberg fan. So, so then when it came time to design Blade Runner, Ridley Scott had connected with Sid Mead, and he was like, okay, I want that guy. And so Sid Mead was brought on, and he did these incredible bloody paintings of, which I will show you in a minute as soon as I get going here. So initially they brought Sid Mead on to design the police vehicle, the so-called spinner, and he designed this sort of thing, this, like, you know, hyper cool. And again, you'll see the rendering with markers, which is sort of just industry standard. If you're going to be, say, a car designer, and many industrial designers want to work on cars. You know, they love cars and they adore them, and they want to. And so you have to learn how to render polished surfaces, basically. So there's a lot of sort of there are a lot of traditions around how to render. Let me put it this way, there were a lot of traditions then. That's changed now because it's all digital now. So obviously, it's a hell of a lot easier to render a material if you can say, you know, the material is this, make the light reflect like that. You know, it's if you can snap on a button and say, you know, metallic matte with whatever the, you know, reflective index is, like, you know, that's a little different from having to figure out, like, okay, what, you know, how do I make this thing read like it's this part's chrome, the other part's black glass, and so on. So, as I say, initially they brought him on to design the spinner, and he did design the spinner, and it's sort of began to look like this, but it also had to roll, right? So they were like, how are we going to build this thing? And so here's one of the most famous paintings of the spinner. It's hard to see, it's dark. So we're looking down on it. And again, the idea is you have to show the thing, but you have to show it in its environment. Well, since Mead was painting in its environment, Ridley Scott was like, what would it, you know, okay, what would the inside look like? So here's the spinner inside. And you'll recognize, in fact, you'll recognize the, if you look at Blade Runner, when Gaff and Deckard at the beginning of the film get into the spinner and it takes off because they're flying back to the police station, you'll see the center screen says, you know, environment purge, and then it blinks and then it turns from like red to green and so on. You'll recognize exactly those same screens and those same animations from Alien. So if you go and look at Alien at the beginning, you'll see these same kinds of things, like, you know, because Scott is just busy. He's also an artist, and so he's just busy, you know, drawing. He does what they call Ridleygrams, and he does the drawings. He just gets his pen and starts sketching. He's like, oh yeah, let's make this a little busier, because Mead has this extremely clean way of designing. I mean, he wants things to be beautiful, and, you know, so here's the picture of the Bradbury Apartments, or here's the Mead painting of the Bradbury Apartments. Now, remember, I was talking about this, I have no, like, years and years ago, I was talking about this when I was talking about Porco Rosso and animation, the people who are painting backgrounds for these, and they're painting them in gouache, right? Which poster paint, basically, it's water-based, a water-based chalky paint that has a very flat color, and that's what you want. You want this flat color. Well, Mead was painting in gouache on glass. Okay, so you would do that because you want the absolute slickest surface you possibly can get. And so it's going to dry without any bubbles and so on. But there are I really cannot think of a more punishing medium to use than gouache painted on glass. It's staggering. So these paintings are in gouache, right? This is Gouache, gouache. Gou. Yeah, that's right. So here's another downtown scene, and so you'll recognize these incredibly busy downtown scenes. And he's the one who comes up with the idea of cities built on top of cities. So he has these sort of hyper city ideas. So here's the top one here, and the concept is there you can see it. The concept is that basically you don't start really living until you hit about floor 100. And then after that, it's like then people who are anybody, you would start to live up there. So if you're living down at the street level, you're really nothing. So here's you got to get the concept here. And that's why they call this concept illustration, because you're doing paintings, or these days digital paintings, which give the idea of what would it look like. And then he designs things like J.F. Sebastian's workplace, which luckily doesn't really look like this, because then Ridley Scott gets in and turns it into this sort of rat's nest of all the sort of, because Sebastian is a hoarder. And, so the characters begin to develop. You've got a background, and then they begin to develop this. Let me show you. So for instance, this was the early proof that we knew that Turrell was actually a replicant, because this is his cryo coffin. And the design here is quite ingenious. So this is a coffin's at the center. It's a bit hard to see sometimes because Mead sort of loves this. He loves these complex geometric renderings where they're quite often black and white, and it's like, what the hell am I looking at? It can take a while. I mean, after you looked at these I've been looking at these drawings for, I don't know, before I was born, I've been looking at them. And so you just sort of you're like, oh yeah, that's the cryo coffin. But the idea is that if somebody approached who didn't have the right to approach, the gantries would retract and drop the coffin into a pool of liquid nitrogen and freeze Turrell solid so he could be revivified later. Never used. And then he designed the Voigt-Kampff machine, which is the machine which Ridley Scott said, I want this to look like a spider. And so this is the initial designs, right? But they're way too beautiful. They're just too clean and pretty. So Ridley Scott said, yeah, okay, no, we're not doing that. And sends the designer back and says, yeah, I understand, like, your aesthetic is, but that's not what we want. So he sends them back and says, and this is what they wind up with, right? So here are the actual drawings for the Voigt-Kampff machine. You can see it has this bellows, so it's going to breathe, and the thing looks like it's alive, basically. And there are some things which are just frickin' brilliant, so they initially, when Deckard gets into his building's elevator, he gets out a card, which he is, so it's a swipe card. Now, you have to remember, this was 1982. Nobody had magnetic stripes on their cards. You went to the bank, you wanted money, you went to the bank, and you handed your book to the teller, and you had a signature card. And the teller could go and pull the signature card and compare your signature on the withdrawal slip with a signature on the signature card and say, yes, this actually is the person's signature. That was it, right? And after a while, they began producing client cards which had numbers on them, but they were just saying, "Oh, okay, that's fine." But of course, anybody could hold that. I mean, didn't mean that it was you. I mean, unless you could produce your wallet. But even then, you could have stolen somebody's whole wallet and be passing yourself off as them. So it was a long time, relatively. And this is before ATMs, right? There were no automatic telling machines. You went into the bank, you dealt with human beings, you had to get money, right? So entry-level positions, one of the jobs that was very common for people at the age of, say, 21, graduating from university, was to look for work as a bank teller, because it was what is considered to be a gray collar job. It's sort of white collar, but not really. It wasn't blue collar, so they were called gray collar jobs. I had the same kind of job. They were very, very useful. I mean, I sorted mail. A friend of mine worked as a bank teller. It was very stressful for her. Not so much for me. I mean, I was like, it was just a matter of sort of who the boss was. But if you're counting money, it's like, oh, it's stressful, and the money is filthy. So okay, so sorry, I was talking about the elevator. So this is 1982. Well, the movie's out in 1982, so they're designing the movie in 1980, right? Because it takes you had at least a year of pre-production with these big things, and then they start to produce. Well, it can take 6 months or more to build the sets and build the pieces that you like. And then Scott walks onto the set, and there's a documentary about this on if you look at the special edition of Blade Runner, and he walks onto the set and he's like, "Yeah, this is a start," and they're like, "This is a start. We've been working on this for 2 months. We've been going nuts." And he's like, "Yeah, let's get some. Okay, this is a good beginning." And he really does make the film. It truly was an astonishing environment, and it was an environment. That's the point. Is you're convinced that this actually is like, yeah, there people live there. So, and that's the felt reality that you're after. Well, one of the things that wasn't working was that when Deckard gets into the elevator, and he says Deckard 109, and the elevator answers him in English and then in German it's Nein Danke, and they start going up, and so it's a voice match, voice print. And I can't remember whether he puts his card in. I think he does, or he's holding his card because he's going to have to get into his apartment. So he's doing the usual thing you would do. You get into an elevator, get your apartment keys out, basically. And it turns out that Rachel is in the car with them, and he has become aware of this. And then he pulls his gun on her. He doesn't, because he doesn't know who it is, and he nearly shoots her. And he's shakes basically. He's having a nervous breakdown fundamentally. Over what he's doing. He can't stand the idea of killing anymore, but all that stuff. So they came to Sid Mead and said, "We've got a pass card. Boring. Do us something that'll read from further than the 10th row. Because if you're in the 10th row and you're looking up at the screen, you can see it's like, oh, it's his pass card. But everybody else further back goes, what? Oh, well, So they said to Sid Mead, go and fix this. We want to have something that's just going to read that he's putting the key in, but it's got to be a fancy key. Oh, Sid Mead, this is what he does for a living, or what he did for a living. Right? So he comes back with this freaking cool idea of the rotary key. So it's a key, and we don't know the scale of the thing here, but so you would hold it, and you run it up the gateway, basically, or the keyhole. And as you do, it lights up all the buttons, and so you can. It's got a visual display, and you can see the guy. It's just such a cool idea, and the impressions would be different for each person. So your key is not like anybody else's key, and so on. And it reads, and this graphically, and it would be this very cool thing. And it's like, what a great idea. So then they never used it because it was too expensive. That's sort of quintessential industrial design for you. They say, go away, make us beat. And they're like, that's a beautiful idea. Well, we can't build it. So what I want you to get from this is a sense of just how much amazing labor goes into the making of these things. With the reminder that just, for all the gorgeous artwork, and it is gorgeous and beautiful, that that these people have poured out over the course of their lives. Let me see if I can find you some more recent, because then towards the end of his life, Mead began to render with, no, it's not going to be in this book. He began to render with Century 2. Okay. He also has this extremely classy signature. Like, look at this thing. It looks like a heartbeat, right? It's amazing. Wow. Just everything about it was designed. So he begins to render with digital tools. Although I see most of this is interesting. Most of this is actually from back in the day, so it's. I thought I could show you one of his more recent digital renderings. Yeah, to some extent, basically, you go on using a medium that these are digital. Okay, so there's a digital tank, for instance. What's so crazy about that? Or is it a boat? It's a boat. Okay. Tank, boat, what's the difference? Yeah, and this is the Model T redesign. So this is what he was doing at the end of his life, as opposed to painting. So he's doing these full renderings, where again you can see the digital, tools at work. Took him a while to take them on, though, I have to say. And I don't think that's where his heart was particularly. He was a damn fine sketch artist. I mean, I'll just show you some of it. I don't in any way. I mean, I think Joe Johnson and Ralph McQuarrie, the guys who oversaw most of the drawings for the artwork for the first 3 Star Wars movies, I think they're geniuses too. Like this drawing of the AT-AT Walker. What a gorgeous drawing that is. My God, and you can just see that's just a sketch. It's just I'm just gonna draw this little thing here, and they produce dozens of these a day. I knew a toy designer, and I said, Jimmy, how many drawings do you do a day? He's like, oh, Tim, 35, 40. It's like, holy Jesus, these guys are just pouring ideas out. However, having said all that, no film, and I will absolutely argue this to the end of time, no film will work if it does not have a good script. And I do believe that the writing is the first thing. You must have a good script. You can have a beautiful film, it can be made beautifully, it can be directed beautifully and be slick, but if it isn't actually about something, and if you don't believe in the people, forget it. You just got a sort of long ad for whatever it might be that you're showing. So now, beginning a long time ago, I began to see films for the writing. And I mean, I could say that there was a time when I would have done that because I was interested in being a writer, but really it's a matter of what is it that makes a film tick? And what makes a film tick, or any story tick, is the story, really, is the writing. How well written is the story? What are the ideas like? And how complex are they? And if they are complex, are they overly complex? Or are they deliverable? Basically, can you actually explain them? Are they explicable? So for me, good writing drives the rest. When you get good writing and a good director, and the director has a good eye and is smart enough to hire good design people and leave them alone to do their thing, and then come back and say, I also have a vision for this. I want it to be more of this and more of that, and they don't just sort of approve of whatever the thing is and go, well, that's fine. It's like, no, because there has to be a unified whole design for the production, which is why you have a production designer, that is somebody who oversees the whole thing. Then you may have indeed a beautifully made film, and that happens about once every 10 years. But it was worth waiting for every second.